There is no doubt that wealth inequality is a massive issue globally. You only have to go to a rapidly developing Asian city to see state-of-the-art high-rises next to slums. This is an excellent image for the state of economics worldwide. The mega-rich than everyone else side by side physically, but definitely not where bank balances are concerned. But what about looking at the UK in isolation? Does this tell a story of a wider problem? The UK is famed for its entrenched class system and historical wealth. Has this got any bearing on inequality as a whole? We're going to explore the inequality of wealth in the UK in this video. Before we start to explore this, a little nudge to like this video if you're enjoying it, and if you want to be the first to see more videos like this one, then click the subscribe button and notification bell for Equity Economics. Now, wealth inequality in the UK. As of last year in Britain, the top 1% of households had 230 times more wealth than those in the bottom 10%. This is the evidence behind what many are feeling in the modern world, that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting further away from being able to pull themselves into a position of comfort. However, there is a suggestion that the UK situation isn't as bad as other countries. Although the gap is very large, it has remained more stable than those countries. Wealth inequality, in contrast, increased between 2000 and 2019 in the US, Italy, Russia, and China, according to estimates. However, these are stats that didn't include data that the pandemic affected. However, another study last year concluded that although the share of wealth owned by the richest 10% in the UK is equal to the unweighted international average share, in 2017 the gap in wealth between the wealthiest tenth of households and the poorest 40% of households in the UK was only beaten by the USA. What these stats confirm is that although the gap has remained fairly stable recently in the UK, there was already a big problem in the first place. It might be seen as just the rest of the world catching up with the UK and their big issues of a gap between the higher members of society and the lower. After all, the data showed the 1% of high-earning households had £3.6 million per household on average, which is a massive 230 times higher than the £15,400 or less for the poorer 10%. It's no wonder then that the gap hadn't increased when it was so big to start off with. Despite the relative plateau in the gap itself, the UK is still comfortably in the top 10 when it comes to inequality. The Gini coefficient is a summary measure of income inequality across distribution. The UK's Gini was 0.35, which is high. When looked at this in more detail, the main reason for this is the difference between high and middle income people, which suggests that it's that 1% again that are really pulling away and increasing the wealth gap. Further studies confirm this and show that the top 1% have incomes substantially higher than the rest of those in the top 10%. Since 1980, the share of income earned by this group in the UK has generally been rising and then peaking to 13% in 2015. This is almost double the corresponding figure for Belgium at 7% and still significantly higher than Australia, Sweden and Norway. To put it into perspective, in the whole world, the top 1% earn 20% of the total income. We're halfway through our look at wealth inequality in the UK, so another reminder that if you're enjoying the video, why not give us a like and a subscribe? It won't cost you a single tax dollar. Anyway, back to wealth inequality in the UK. A more recent report from the Institute of Fiscal Studies showed that inherited wealth was growing at a much quicker pace than earned wealth, which increased the wealth gap further. This was shown by the fact that the amount of time it would take to earn enough to move from the middle wealth bracket to the top had increased by almost 6 years in a decade. In 2008, you'd need to be making money for 10 years of typical full-time earnings to move from the middle to the top wealth bracket. 10 years later, in 2018, the figure was 16 years to get there. What this means in real terms is that those who already have wealth have their wealth increased, leaving everyone else who wants to come to the party stranded because their wages can't compete. So those at the top of the tree increase their distance from those at the bottom. The IFS also suggested that the pandemic made things worse because those with savings and assets saw the value of these increase dramatically while other parts of the economy were closed off completely. This is why campaign groups are calling for something to be done so the gap doesn't widen further. They suggest taxation of the rich to level the playing field. They argue that £37 billion could be raised this way. And they also argue that this is a much fairer way of getting the money rather than the government's tactical austerity after the 2008 global recession. This involved cuts to public services, which impacted the poor the most. Another barrier, rather than just income for those wanting to close the gap, is the fact that they can't get onto the property ladder to enter into the game to allow their assets to increase. Statistics show that young people aren't buying houses in the way they used to because it's simply too expensive. 36% of people born in the 1980s owned their own home by the age of 30. This is a massive drop compared with 55% of those born in the 70s and over 60% of those born in the 50s and 60s. House prices are a big problem in the UK because they have risen massively, but wages have stalled. So before, where you could just save some money and put money down on a house, this is no longer the case, no matter how frugal you are. Prices have seen a gradual rise from the last few decades and have spiked recently due to the 2008 financial crisis, helped by rock-bottom interest rates from the Bank of England since the banking crash, and then another huge increase during the COVID pandemic. What this touches on is not just the general gap between the rich and the poor, but also a gap between the old and the younger as being rich and poor respectively. Data shows that this gap is widening, particularly when it comes to income. For those born in the UK in the 40s and 50s, incomes would typically double from their late 20s to their early 50s. This is no longer the case, and as the decades have continued, income levels do not increase at anywhere near the same rate. Those born in the 1960s only saw their income grow less than their elders over that 20 to 50 age gap, whilst it's projected that those even younger will see more of a stall. It's very clear that there is a massive divide in the UK between rich and poor. What the data shows us is that this has been a problem for a very long time, which explains why we're not seeing the dramatic increases you might expect with wealth inequality in the country. That's not to say that it hasn't increased in recent years. There's still plenty of data to be analysed that will give us a better picture on that, which will include the impact of the pandemic and the Ukrainian war. Initial predictions suggest that we should expect the gap to get much bigger before it gets smaller. What do you think of wealth inequality in the UK? Have you felt it? Or have you felt it in a different country? Let us know in the comments, and remember to like this video and subscribe to Equity Economics to get notified of the latest videos just like this one. Thanks for watching.